today's session we will not begin with a Shanti mantra. We'll begin with some Hindustani classical music set to the first stanza in Adi Shankara's Atma Shatakam. If you recall, in the last session we explored briefly the question, who are you? I think you tried to answer that question. The same question was asked of Shankaracharya when he was 16 years old in the Himalayas. And it seems he spontaneously composed this poem. We'll just listen to it, rendered by Pandit Jasraj, just the first verse. So it goes like this.
मनोबुद्धि अहंकार चित्तानिनाहं न च श्रोत्र जिह्वे न च घ्राणनेत्रे न च व्योम भूमिर्न तेजो न वायुश्चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं मनोबुद्धि अहंकार चित्तानेनाहं मनोबुद्धि अहंकार चित्तानेनाहं मनोबुद्धि अहंकार चित्तानेनाहं चित्तानेनाहं न च श्रोत्र जिह्वे न च घ्राणनेत्रे न च श्रोत्र जिह्वे न च घ्राणनेत्रे न च घ्राणनेत्रे चित्तानिनाहं न च श्रोत्र जिह्वे न च घ्राणनेत्रे न च व्योम भूमिर्न तेजो न वायुश्चिदानन्दरूपः शिवोऽहं 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 चिदानन्दरूपः चिदानन्द चिदानन्द रूप शिवोऽहं शिवो.
The entire 6 stanzas runs into half an hour. And I hope to show you clippings of it, every stanza, to give you some idea of the depth of understanding, realization, which is possible at an early age. So don't think you have to retire and you might hit on this. And it starts early. And we were exploring this topic of Sat and Asat in the last class. And we were a little shocked to discover that almost everything we deal with in our daily lives is all Asat. Which doesn't mean that Sat is not there. And the challenge for us is to discover that Sat amidst the Asat. And that's possible. That's the real challenge. So we were halfway through that third chapter. We'll finish it and hopefully we'll try to complete It's a very interesting chapter, the fourth chapter. It's called The Calm and Wise Hero, Sthita Pratnya. These are the remaining chapters. We hopefully will finish everything in the 14 sessions that we have together. So we explored this and we move to the next topic. If you have the book, all of you have got copies of the book. We've ordered some additional copies. If you want, Senthil can get them for you. So we are on page 32, Getting Lost in Object-Centered Awareness. Our habitual experience is one of object-centered awareness, where the subject gets lost in objective experience. You're also going through, hopefully, those meditation notes. The subject gets lost in objective experience. Can you give any example of that? We've actually explored this in the self-awareness course also. When do you get lost in the world? So lost that you don't even realize you got lost. Give an example. You must speak a language which everybody understands. In the box, we people who did self-awareness will understand.
When you're not in the present,
When you're not in the present.
thinking about the future, past, and
So we are typically lost in thought. Right? Typically lost in thought. But here's a good example. This happens, for example, when we go to a movie theater. We forget that we are sitting in a cold, dark, air-conditioned room, seated next to strangers, looking at flickering projections of light and color on a white screen and the sounds that come with them. When we tend to identify with some of the characters in the movie, feeling their agony and ecstasy, we get completely lost, completely forgetting who and where we are. That is more or less what happens to us in our so-called real life. The other one is real life. This is real life. We get lost in object-centered awareness and sometimes never find our true selves all the way from birth to death. Self-awareness implies inwardly stepping back and objectively witnessing all the arising objects without getting caught up in identifying with these passing or recurring vibrations. If you look at the meditation practice we are attempting to do, we try to discriminate between two ways of knowing. One is called attention, where you focus on something. The other is called awareness or peripheral awareness. The problem with attention is we tend to lose awareness. Typically, when you get caught in an argument, you get so caught that you forget everything around you, the context, and you understand we are lost. And that's not healthy, that's not good, because you're not open to what's happening, and there may be a crisis that calls for immediate attention, but you don't have the energy to do it. The reason is we have limited energy, we have limited power of consciousness, and it's consumed either by attention or by awareness. If too much of attention is demanded, we lose awareness completely. If we are too relaxed, we may be aware dimly, but then we can't concentrate. We get distracted. Do you understand? So, the whole objective of this mind training is to master these two ways of doing it, so that at will you can do what is most healthy and appropriate. In ordinary introspection, what is introspection? Looking inwards. So we often do that, no? But that is not true witnessing. Why is it not true witnessing? True witnessing is kind of objective, impersonal. You can look at your opinion with the same objectivity as you can look at somebody else's opinion to find out what's true, what's right. But we are often biased by our own opinion. So the problem with introspection is what? Who is introspecting what? Who is this we? In ordinary introspection, we do not step back far enough into the pure witness consciousness, and so one part of our being ends up observing the other parts. One part is observing other parts, constantly judging, approving, disapproving, etc. Self-realization, with a capital S, according to ancient Indian wisdom, is all about finding our true self. This requires us to awaken consciously to the reality of who we truly are, the Sat, the true subject. It is possible to attain this awakening by simply refusing to get completely lost in object-centered awareness. When we say, we are only saying don't get completely lost. Get lost a little bit, no problem. That's probably necessary to function in the world, but not so lost that you forget who you are. That's a huge challenge. To get completely lost in object-centered awareness in the drama of life, no matter how engaging it is. This calls for a calm, clear, and sharply focused, relaxed and non-judgmental attention. That's exactly the goal of our meditation. We said it's twofold. One is to have stable attention. The other is to nurture mindfulness, which means a kind of put together, it's a relaxed attention. Free of tension, but yet focused enough. This is what we need to do whenever possible, and this is a conscious practice of sustained inquiry and lifelong meditation. We then discover that various kinds of objects come and go in our awareness, just as clouds of different changing shapes and sizes appear and disappear in the blue sky. This example was actually given by the Buddha. The awareness, like the sky, remains pure and unchanged by the objects. Indeed, we will also experience blissful moments of pure awareness, devoid of objects, like a blue cloudless sky. We then make the huge discovery that our true self is complete by itself. What's the Sanskrit word for complete we explored in the last session? Purnam. What's that verse? Purnamadam Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyute Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. So, life becomes completely different if you're really Purnam and aware of it while engaging in the world. That's the outcome of self-realization. The huge discovery that our true self is complete by itself and does not really need objects to gain fulfillment. So we go to the next topic, which is body and indwelling spirit, Deha and Dehi. The divine teacher points out to Arjuna and to us a great truth that we tend to be blind to. The true self in us is not in the body, not the body or any other object in our object-centered consciousness that we habitually identify with. All these objects are indeed perishable, but the Sat in our bodies, manifesting as the hidden indwelling spirit, Dehi, in the body, Deha, is imperishable. Deha is Asat, perishable, mutable, from dust unto dust. Dehi, okay, then you will question all this. And it's good to keep it, hold the question. I mean, don't swallow what's given here or in the Gita wholesale. This is traditional Indian wisdom. It's, as far as you know, second-hand experience until you experience it first-hand. Sri Aurobindo refers to the Dehi as the conscious embodied soul manifesting as a spark of the divine fire. Indeed, when someone known to us dies in front of us, our very attitude to the body changes. Is it not true? Someone even close to you, you hear someone has died and that body is lying on the floor. When you look at the body of anybody, what do you feel? Dead body. I happened to see in the last week two of my friends, parents. Yeah, what do you feel?
Memories associated.
Huh?
Memories associated.
Yeah. Memories, but you may not even know, I don't know the parents. I just see a dead body on the floor. I visit the house. What do you feel?
Feels like the person has gone and it's just a body.
First of all, you refer to the person no longer as a person, you refer to that body. Right? Person has gone, he said. Where did that person go? Don't know, but gone somewhere and not. Okay. Looking at the dead body, we no longer refer to it by name as him or her. Instead, we refer to it as a body. And we wish to. What do you want to do when you see a body, dead body? All of us. You want to? Bury it. You want to get rid of it. Get rid of it. Why? Why? Huh? It starts. So it starts decaying and decomposing. The same body to which we may have had some attraction or attachment earlier now becomes something repulsive and fearful. Repulsive and fearful when life departs from the body. Now it's very interesting. Deha is linked to what word? The Sanskrit term deha, body, is linked to the verb dahyati. What does dahyati mean? Dahyati. You must be knowing. Huh? It means to be burnt or consumed by fire. Its very definition points to something that is going to perish. So when you say deha, this body, if you knew your Sanskrit root, you'll say this that is destined to be burnt if you're getting cremated or buried or whatever. Actually, you're straight away saying it is asat. The very word says it's asat. Don't cling to it too much. Don't think it is going to last forever. Don't even think it is you, because you are not the deha, you are the dehi. The deha, bereft of the indwelling dehi, is put away into the fire in cremation, an act of purification actually. The fire purifies. Okay, now I want you, how many of you have heard of Ramana Maharshi? Okay. I strongly suggest, if you're interested, read a small book, very small. It actually made a huge impression on me when I read it first, many years ago, by Arthur Osborne. It's just titled Ramana Maharshi. Thin book. Jayco Publishers. Or you can read a book called A Search of Secret India by Paul Brunton. He actually was introduced to the world. He was relatively unknown. The world came to know about it through a book by Paul Brunton called Paul Brunton, Paulbrunton. The book is titled A Search of Secret India. So, I'm just quoting from that book by Arthur Osborne. Okay. This is the experience of a young boy, again 16 years old or so. I was sitting alone in a room on the first floor of my uncle's house. I seldom had any sickness, and on that day there was nothing wrong with my health, but a sudden violent fear of death overtook me. 16-year-old boy describing what happened to him. There was nothing in my state of health to account for it, and I did not try to account for it, or to find out whether there was any reason for the fear. I just felt I am going to die and began thinking of what to do about it. It did not occur to me to consult a doctor or my elders or friends. I felt that I had to solve the problem myself there and then. Look at the boy. The shock of the fear of death drove my mind inwards, And I said to myself mentally without actually framing the words, now death has come. What does it mean? What is it that is dying? This body dies. Young boy. And I at once dramatized the occurrence of death. I lay with my limbs stretched out, stiff, as though rigor mortis had set in, and imitated a corpse so as to give greater reality to the inquiry. I held my breath and kept my lips tightly closed so that no sound could escape, so that neither the word I nor any other word could be uttered. Well then, I said to myself, this body is dead. It will be carried stiff to the burning ground and there burnt and reduced to ashes. But with the death of this body, am I dead? Is the body I? It is silent and inert, but I feel the full force of my personality and even the voice of the I within me apart from it. So I am spirit transcending the body. The body dies, but the spirit that transcends it cannot be touched by death. That means I am the deathless spirit. Without any training, without any bookish knowledge, self-realization at the age of 60, direct experience. That's, and so many people from all over the world just came to look at his eyes. He would sit like that. And he used to always communicate telepathically. So language was never a barrier. And he will know what's in your mind just by looking at you. And your question, which you yourself may not recall, will be answered by the time you leave his presence. That was Ramana Maharshi. All this was not dull thought. It flashed through me vividly as living truth, which I perceived directly, almost without thought process. I was something very real, the only real thing about my present state. And all the conscious activity connected with my body was centered on that I. From that moment onwards, the I or self focused attention on itself by a powerful fascination. Fear of death had vanished once and for all. Absorption in the self continued unbroken from that time on. Other thoughts might come and go, like the various notes of music, but the I continued like the fundamental Shruti, monotone note that underlies and blends with all the other notes. That's what we mean by living in the world but not being of the world. That not to lose that Shruti. So that Sat is there. It protects you, it guides you. It prevents you from getting lost in object-centered consciousness. And it also helps you connect with the Sat in everything else. And so Asat is not a problem. Discovering Sat is a problem. But in the traditional path of, say, Vedanta, the method was called Neti Neti. Na iti, which means you check out all the asats that you can think of and say, if it's asat, you say, no, not this, not this, not this. And by negation, you might hit on the sat. That used to be one technique. We'll go straight to, before the verse. Our experiences are usually limited to the world of the five senses and the psychological world of thoughts and emotions, which in Buddhism is also called a sense. It's a sixth sense, they say. Although spirit is involved in all our experience, it is not something that can be grasped by the senses or inferred logically by reason. This is conveyed in this verse.
Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakah, na chainam kledayantyapo, na shoshayati marutah.
So remember the context. You see, all this came out because of Arjuna's Vishada. I mean, Krishna would not have ventured to give all this because Arjuna asked fundamental questions. So he said, okay, you want to know the fundas, we'll start with the fundas, then we'll move onwards. So the fundas are also meant for us. Weapons do not cut it. So he says, you are worried about killing somebody. Who's killing whom? Weapons do not cut it. Na enam chindanti shastrani. Fire does not burn it. Na enam dahati pavakaha. Water does not drench it. Na cha enam kledayanti apaha. Wind does not wither it. Na shoshayati marutaha. Very simple. So, you can slay the body. You can burn it. You can hurt it. But you can't touch the spirit within. There's a story about Alexander the Great when he came to India first. They say his army was blocked by a great sage who was sitting on the road under a tree. And though he had his eyes open and he could see what's happening, he refused to budge from there. Alexander's teacher philosopher was Aristotle. This goes way back. And Aristotle had sent his deputy to travel along with Alexander, who really wanted to conquer the world. He couldn't get beyond the Ganges for some reason. There's a 4-part series worth reading on Alexander the Great. And the last part deals with what happened to him in India. So he's kind of... Alexander doesn't like to wait. Not like Siddhartha, who could think and who could wait and who could fast. So he said, who's blocking the path? Then the message came to him that, there's some sage, Indian sage, who's refusing to move. Then this man got angry, got down and followed and reached the sage. The sage also looked at him the way Ramana Maharshi was looking at people. So he took out his sword, put it near his throat and he said, if you don't move, khalas. And that sage just smiled at him. And it seems this is what he said. You can only kill the body. Simple fact. You can only kill the body. Actually, Alexander didn't know what to do. But his philosopher friend, whoever came with him, Aristotle's disciple, took him aside and said, you want to win, you want to progress further in this, better get him on your side. And so finally Alexander prostrated in front of him, begged mercy and said, can you help me continue the journey? And he actually got him onto his side. And thus the story goes. But this is ancient truth. At least well known, well discovered in India. These qualities point to the Sat nature of the indwelling spirit. The indwelling spirit cannot be destroyed in any manner. It is greater than all manifestation and cannot be grasped by the limited mind. So you cannot challenge and ask me, where's the proof and all that. You get it, you get it. You don't get it, you don't get it. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was taking a class in structural analysis. At 1 o'clock. Not a good time to take a class, but we had some fun in the class. At the end of it, one student followed me and said, sir, I know all this is supposed to be very interesting and all that, but I'm sorry, I'm repeating this course and I don't understand. And can you teach me how to love this subject? Then I asked him, do you like anything in engineering? He said, no sir, to be honest, no. Do you like anything in any subject? He said, yes sir, social sciences. Then the conversation went another direction. I said, why are you wasting your time here? But let me not, because some of you may be in his shoes, so let's not get into So I asked him, you are asking a very difficult thing. Let's say I bring a beautiful girl here, and there were other students around. And everybody's saying, wow, look at that. And you're saying, sir, can you help me see the beauty in this girl? You either get it or you don't get it, right? You can't prove beauty. So this is what we call an axiom. You either get it as a self-evident truth at some point in your life or you don't. The divine teacher goes on to point out that all are the one divine self, taking on different forms and embodiments, eternally indestructible. The truly wise know this, and hence they do not grieve on account of destruction of bodies and forms, which are by nature subject to mutation.
देहि नित्यमवध्योऽयं देहे सर्वस्य भारत तस्मात् सर्वाणि भूतानि न त्वं शोचितुमर्हसि.
This one self, eternally indestructible, Dehi Nityam Avadhyah Ayam, is embodied in all bodies, O Arjuna. Dehe Sarvasya Bharata. Bharata is another name for Arjuna here. Therefore you have no cause, tasmat natvam arhasi, to grieve for all these beings. Shochitum sarvani bhutani. You see, the whole Vishada is grief. Arjuna's whole basis, and he tried to justify quoting the scriptures and all that. Krishna is trying to demolish right from the beginning. He says, if you are really wise, you will not grieve because people die. Death is unavoidable. And the self does not kill, the self does not get killed. The truly wise know this. What happens to the indweller after the death of the body? What happens to the Dehi after the Deha goes?
So the body starts to decompose and
What happens to, you're looking at the wrong part. That will decompose, it will become humus, and then it will create fresh life and all that. But what happens to you in the body?
so the spirit.
Yep.
So I mean there are a lot of explanations.
You give me your explanation.
So I believe so. It's just a collection of memories and it just fades away with us.
Oh, Kalas.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What does the Dalai Lama believe?
So
You belong to that group. So what do your ancestors believe?
so they believe that all people reincarnate, and based on our karma we'll be reincarnated as in good or bad situation.
Okay, good. So I think this is a modern scientific position. It's good to be agnostic. You say, I don't know. That's actually the true answer. I don't know. But you also said some memories and all that. So in the Indian tradition, for example, they say that there are 3 bodies that we have. The outer body is called Sthula Shariram, the gross body, the physical body, the material body. That will go to the soil, or you get burnt, it will go to smoke. Inside that, there's a subtle body. It's called the Sukshma Shariram or Sukshma Deha. You can say Deha also. Sukshma means subtle. The Sukshmas is where we spend most of our time thinking and feeling, all the emotions which are not captured by the body. They belong to the vital and the mental, not the physical. That we can understand, no? We reside there. But that's hidden. And you say that doesn't die immediately. You're right, that's also the belief. Each of these bodies has a different lifetime. That lasts. Actually, they say that if you commit suicide and you have a lot of unsatisfied, unmet needs, then those needs have to be satisfied in some way, no? So you might say you end up as a ghost, which is very likely, or you might have to take rebirth to satisfy those needs again, so you come back to rebirth. But there's a third body which is very, very subtle. What's it called? It's called the Karana Sharira. Karana Sharira, the causal body. Karana means cause. Causal body, which is actually the storehouse of all the stuff that is, karmic residue that is left, all the good things and bad things, that has a long life, and that is carried. That's a belief. But you may or may not accept it, and we are open to both, don't worry. But with an open mind, let's hear out what these people say. In the Tibetan tradition, how do they identify the Dalai Lama over many years? Tell.
So it's a different sect, but I know the practices.
Yeah, just tell, how do you identify?
So apparently, their sect actually looks for a boy, and he has to accomplish certain tasks and certain features.
So there's a BBC feature on this, on how how they're able to identify, and they know precisely what was he in his previous life and so on. How they do it is a mystery, but there are mystic ways of doing it. What happens to the indweller after the death of the body is, of course, an open question, and we have different ideas about this depending on our religious or other beliefs. These ideas are difficult to either prove or disprove. Agreed? There are some who choose to believe that the indweller also perishes along with the body, like you, no? Partly, he said, I don't know, I don't care also. Many conventional religions give much importance to the afterlife, which means either ascending to some heaven or descending to some hell, depending on whether the karmic effects earned during this one lifetime turn out to be positive or negative. Right? That belief is also there. Now we come to the next topic without getting into... So the key words are Deha and Dehi.